state of Indiana. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit through my experiences about our water quality monitoring shortfalls with these questions that have actually been in my head for at least a dozen years now. What are the major surface water pollutants that we should be monitoring, and how often are we monitoring them? And I'll give you a little insight into my journey in this world. And I'd like to take a step back, although President Heckler did a great job in giving us that greater picture about fresh water and our challenges around the world. But we've got a lot of water in this world, but a small percentage of it is fresh water, and an even smaller percentage of that is available to us. And as he even mentioned, sort of my lower statistic there, by 2025, we're looking at about 2 billion people expected to be living in countries or regions with what we call absolute water scarcity. So in general, we can talk about our water challenges in two basic categories. The lack of water, which we don't have issues with that here in the Midwest around the Great Lakes, but water quality, ensuring that we maintain this quality of our fresh water. Bottom line is, it's a precious resource, and the question is, do we treat it that way? So here's our Great Lakes, and they truly are Great Lakes, and we often, again, take this for granted. They account for 84% of North America's surface fresh water, and even worldwide, a very significant amount of our water. So we want to protect that water. But I also want to impress upon you that we have what we call the Great Lakes Watershed. So in these areas in green, this is the land that drains into the Great Lakes. So anything that happens on that land can end up in the local waterways there, and that water then gets carried into the Great Lakes. So our fresh water is not just about looking at what's happening only in the water, but around us as well. So all that pollution can flow from creeks, streams, rivers to the lakes. Our air pollution, raining out pollutants happens, so that can fall directly into our lakes or again into the watershed that leads to our Great Lakes. So it's a bigger picture than just the water bodies themselves, as pointed out in Aaron's talk too. So this is from a chemist's perspective. Notice I got the biological contaminants last here. So from a chemist's perspective, some of the things, the way we can categorize, what are the pollutants of concern? So pesticides and nutrients are used to a large extent in agriculture, but excuse me, but an awful lot of them are used. We have sort of this obsession, especially in this country, for beautiful green grass. I live around people like that. I think they're annoyed by me because I'm not. So there's a lot of people using lots of nutrients, lots of herbicides to ensure that their grass is green as the next door neighbor's grass. We also use lots of pesticides to control pests, to make sure our plants are doing well. This is all fine and dandy, but everybody can use as much as they want. Pharmaceuticals. If you look at the rise in the sales of pharmaceuticals over the last couple decades, it's been quite impressive. So those don't stay within our bodies. In fact, usually a small percentage is actually metabolized, and much of it gets passed through our bodies. So these definitely have become a pollution of concern to our waterways. Toxic metals. So pleased to have Professor Edwards here. He's been at the forefront of looking at these toxic metals, and Professor Wells will talk about lead in particular and what that means. And so this is coming from industry, but it's coming from people in South Bend, Indiana, where Professor Peasley's been working, the lead paint that's become an issue there. So these can also end up in our waterways. Specialty chemicals, and I'll leave that one for you to talk about too. Particulates that are in the air, again, they get rained out. Oh, I missed the land use changes. I put this one in there for you, Walt. No, it's because it's true. We have to be careful in the way we change land. We have lots of advancement in our world and our societies, and what's the impact on our waterways. And the one that I've been working on pretty intricately is number 7, plastics. We're recognizing what a big deal this is. If we just go outside, we can look around. It doesn't take very long to see these pollutants. And they end up in our waterways. They blow around a lot. They end up in our waterways. And if you've paid any attention, you've seen the massive amount that's ended up in the oceans. And what's not always communicated is the fact that what we see is probably the smaller percentage. What we don't see, that's the larger percent of the plastics that are out there. So I'll talk just briefly about that in a minute. But and again, the biological contaminants is what we know that our human health effects occur quickly. The chemicals, it's usually long-term, over time that those effects play out, as opposed to the biological contaminants. So of course they're very important to consider. Now, like I said, I will focus on that in a minute. So what are your concerns about your local surface water? Have you thought about who's checking this, and what are the factors that I need to consider? What are the challenges in my area that might end up affecting my drinking water as well? So again, this is kind of it's not as new as we might want to say. Emerging pollutants is what we call it in our world, emerging pollutants. They're out of control. They don't go anywhere. They just compile. Some pictures from some local water quality monitoring I've done over the years, where you're going, okay, what's this? This looks a little different. Why can't I see, more than a couple inches down in the water? And so a more aerial photo is this is something that we need to pay attention to. What's that? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We're all connected here, Rob. And then, like I said, the current work that we're doing on what we call synthetic microfibers, which come from our clothing, or our blankets, or our stuffed animals, or our carpeting, on and on and on. So this world of plastics, usually we don't think about our clothing, but when we're talking about polyester and we're talking about nylon, so these very, very common fabrics, these are just other names for plastics. We just wear plastic clothes. Just a different way of looking at it. They shed tremendously. This image that you're looking at right now was from laundry water effluent, because of course that's going to be a big source of this type of contamination. And I think, where are you, Eddie? Eddie's my student, has been working on this for a while for me. I think we're taking what might be like a small coffee cup full of water and filtering it and getting an image under the microscope like this. So that's how many fibers that you find in that small amount of water. So we've been out in the waterways and adding that to our list of things that we should be concerned about. So again, we have to be innovative in the way we're approaching our water quality monitoring and consider what are the most important pollutants out there. So really, we all have these in our bodies now. It's in our food, it's in the fish. We're finding it in all kinds of, especially aquatic organisms. And so we need to really consider this as a pollutant of concern. So again, I go back to how often is surface water tested? So you have maybe a local creek by you. What should be tested? Do you know what's going on with that? And that's sort of been questions I've been asking for years now. Who's testing this? What's going on? Well, referring to IDEM's website again. Just taking this from their website. This is what the state of Indiana does. I mean, ultimately, it's under state rule, this water quality monitoring. Right, guys? Okay, so I'm learning from the lawyers and attorneys. The responsibility for watershed monitoring is under the Watershed Assessment and Planning Branch. IDEM uses what they call a rotating basin approach, and there's a handful of states that do this. So they've sectioned out the state into 9 major water management basins. Each year, one is monitored. 9 basins, each year one is monitored. So I ask everybody, just from your own perspective, is it satisfactory to monitor a watershed, the surface water, once every 9 years. And I've yet to find somebody who goes, yeah, that's just great. But I think this is what you have to do when you don't have resources. You have to find a way to do something when you don't have the resources. So that's up to the people to say, you know what, we really want to protect our waterways better. You know, we're the ones who elect officials to make these decisions on our behalf. If you think this is not satisfactory, this is something we as a population of people need to talk about more. So what's required for effective, scientifically rigorous water quality monitoring? I've been searching through those who have this as their main focus of their work. Came across a USGS, United States Geological Survey 2006 document, which just spoke to me wonderfully. And in their perspective on water quality monitoring assessment, they said there is a documented inadequacy of current water quality monitoring efforts around the United States. Okay, so from their assessment, and this again was in 2006, I don't think things have gotten better. And in their document, we need science-based approaches. We have to be able to recognize the science. What's the science telling us about our challenges? What do we need to be monitoring, quantifying? And our monitoring, again, needs to be according to pollution. So if you're living next to a CAFO or a CFO, you want your surface water monitored so you can know if that's affecting your water. And so we have to be strategic about our locations, and then we have to be strategic about the frequency. Once every 9 years is probably not sufficient. So some of my colleagues who've been working on this with me, we sat and looked at each other a couple years ago and said, well, whose responsibility is this then? And we sort of said, I guess we should be doing more. So since about 2015, we've really ramped it up. Thanks to some funding, we've gotten some EPA funding, some NSF funding, which has really helped get this in gear. Science takes money, unfortunately. We just can't do it without money. And we've partnered with some local schools. We've partnered with nonprofits, and we're trying to expand that, and I'm so pleased to have so many of them here today. We've partnered with mostly the USGS, that government agency, but also the National Lakeshore National Parks Department. And we've been doing ongoing watershed monitoring in Portage. This is our 4th year now. We go out with the 8th graders. We have wonderful teachers. The teachers are key to making this successful. And we teach the kids. They help us get samples. We do some of the testing back at the labs, do some data analysis. So this is creating more community awareness and stewardship. And what we want to see happen here is this turn into something long-term. And we want to do it frequent enough so that we gather appropriate data. So I'm going to end there to pass this on to Graham. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chris. Is this working? I think it is. Yep. All right, so now you've had an exciting morning full of optimistic news and enthusiasm and hope. I'm going to add to it, yes. I'm not invited to many parties anymore, so I take every invitation I can get because I generally am, my public relations people call me the downer. I'm not invited because I keep on talking about pollutants of concern that are getting more and more prevalent and people don't seem to notice. So I'm going to talk, I'm very happy to be invited here, but I'm going to talk about something that we haven't talked about. We've talked about industrial sources and point source pollution. We've talked about non-point source pollution, CAFOs, which are really a point source, but they're active. We're a big agricultural area, and that's a huge nitrate and phosphate pollution. And I've stumbled into something else just simply from my background. I'm from the physics department. You guys are all physics majors, I can tell. So I've got to speak to using analytical techniques, the water monitoring type techniques that Julie's talked about, and applied them to a new form, an emerging contaminant, which I'm going to call per-and-polyfluorinated alkyl substances. How many people know about PFAS? Excellent. We've had it. It's been on the news. If you haven't read the news recently, it's on almost every newspaper, but usually somewhere else. Indiana hasn't recognized this exists yet, so it's kind of fun. It is these compounds called PFO or PFOS, are often referred to specifically that way. Those are just specific congeners of a fluorochemical. That means you've got carbon in gray and fluorine in green in those molecules. Getting a little chemistry lesson here. And they have different end groups. These are the world's most perfect surfactants. They're soaps. Okay? They separate oil and water better than any other chemical ever made, and they're all man-made. The carbon-fluorine bond is the strongest in chemistry. Single bond is the strongest chemistry, single bond. Nothing will break it down on this planet. You have to have ultraviolet light, and pretty strong one at that. Not that you're going to receive. And so what we end up with is a industrial molecule that has great potential for all sorts of applications. It's used in Teflon. It is the non-stick on Teflon pans. Okay? And you know that that is a very slippery surface because it's such a good thing. It is used in Gore-Tex and the jackets because you will stay dry with this material better than anything else. It's used in firefighting foam. It's a halogen, so it absorbs electrons, it quenches ignition temperatures, and it is also layers the difference between oil and water. So when you have a jet fuel fire, this is the stuff you want. Okay, so it's firefighting foams. It's also in, carpets. Why not put it in carpets? Because that Scotch guard that you put on your carpet, it's now changed, but 3M got out of this in 2000. But up until that point, we were using perfluorinated compounds, and the carpet industry is still using it to make sure you can spill your wine and you don't have to wash it anymore. It just soaks right up and doesn't go in. That's because of its remarkable surfactant properties of keeping the stains off it. And of course, microwave popcorn. You guys awake? Okay, good. And most of the students here have seen microwave popcorn. What's the first thing you see when you take microwave popcorn out of the microwave? You cut it open, and what's the first thing that greets you? Steam. You're an excellent chemist. You put steam in a paper bag. Why would you put steam in a paper bag? It's coming from the kernels. It releases water. Comes out as water vapor. Well, the bag would get soggy. So what do you line the inside of the bag with? Fluoroalkyl substances that prevent water from heating the paper. Okay, it's what's called a lipophilic chemical. You put it in there, toss some butter in, heat it up to 200 degrees, and eat it. Is that a good place to put your chemical? Probably not. Okay, so in Denmark in 2012, the major food corporation there called Coop, serves 75% of Danish food, said we're removing microwave popcorn from the shelves. We value our customers' lives too much. Okay, it took about 6 months till a company, an American company, made a fluorine-free bag for them. Okay, in this country, we still don't have fluorine-free bags in our microwave popcorn. That's just another story. There's a book out called Stain Resistant, Non-Stick, Waterproof, and Lethal. Reason we know this is these chemicals are long environmental lifetimes, so they've hit the persistence in terms of persistence, bioaccumulative and toxic. These guys are the leading persistent chemical, thousands of years typically in the environment. The Hoosick Falls made the news the other day because it's a funny sign, best tasting New York water. It had a perfluorinated spill from an industrial corporation, Saint Germain, that gave it a headline in the last election cycle. The second slide there is a flame retardant release. The military has been using this flame retardant for the last 60 years on every military base in the country. There are 2,300 military bases in this country that use it. Every runway that they put the test fire out, every aircraft carrier tests every day in every location to put out a flame fire, because when you have a jet plane crash on an aircraft carrier, it's important. What do they do with the foam afterwards? That's from the Navy website, or it used to be, it's down now. They toss it into the sea, which explains why, as a persistent bioaccumulative toxin, it shows up in polar bear blood. There are 300 parts per billion in polar bear blood of this chemical, or this family of chemicals, because they travel north and south. It lasts for thousands of years, it migrates. Polar bears don't eat a lot of microwave popcorn. They eat seals that eat the fish that swim through the oceans that we've been doing this to for 60 years. And so this pollutant is getting everywhere. Everybody in North America has about 5 parts per billion parts per PFAS in their blood, because you are the top predator in the temperate climates. Okay, you eat food, you drink water that is polluted with this stuff, and it gets into you. It's all a man-made chemical, courtesy of our agreed to have everything nice. And we get a lot of personal care products and other such things that release these surfactants into it. So it's ubiquitous, it's bioaccumulates, persistent, oh yeah, and it's toxic. That's the last thing. For 70 years, we've been told by the chemical company that made it, which isn't regulated to do otherwise, said, oh, it's safe. even though they moved pregnant workers from the working line because they're having birth defects. Oops. Okay, and they were sued by a lawyer who's now famous out of West Parkersburg, Virginia, where the plant DuPont accidentally poisoned a watershed. And they had dumped for 8 years into this thing before they noticed that everybody in Little Hocking, Ohio was drinking PFAS-laden water. It led to a very scary set of cancer clusters. People noticed and then sued. They turned down an early settlement offer of several $100 million and said, no, we don't want your money, we want to know what it is, and fund a study to do it. And DuPont took the bet. They said, you'll never get enough statistical evidence that there's any toxicity. They funded the largest epidemiological study ever conducted that I know of. They thought they'd get a couple thousand claimants. They got 69,000 people to test their blood. And they went after them, and they studied 31 disease correlations with these 69,000 blood samples. And they found 6 positively correlated and 25 others which were not. Testicular cancer, kidney cancer, hypertension, pregnancy-induced hypertension, preeclampsia, high cholesterol, and ulcerative colitis. That's your big ticket for the lawyers, because those are now actionable. 3,500 people had those diseases, and they joined on the second lawsuit, and they settled for $671 million. They took 3 to trial. That was stupid. They lost in half a day, and they had discovery, so they had to read aloud the memos they'd sent. Really embarrassing. If you want a really downer of a movie, thedevilweknow.com is this story about that lawsuit. And in litigation society, that often drives how this chemical is treated. This suit was centered around how they removed PFOA and PFOS from manufacture in this country, but at great personal cost to the community. And that community has had a lot of suffering. Not a really fun movie, but really important to see how it works. The trouble with this stuff is it's environmentally persistent. It goes through a wastewater treatment plant and goes rocketing right through, like the pharmaceuticals Professor Pella mentioned earlier. It goes through from your food packaging, from your animals, firefighting foam release into the surface water or the groundwater, and it will. It's like salad dressing. You shake it, it separates. It is very water soluble, but it transports in your waterways, and so we're drinking a lot of it. And this is the worry, because if we look, this is a 2016 article, we estimated somewhere about 6 million people were already drinking it in this country. And I think that number is artificially low. It's based on EPA statistics of unmonitoring, UMCR3, the unmonitored contaminant testing. They tested 6 PFASs, not the 3,000 that exist. And of them, they found them in the 6 million people who were already in the drinking water supplies. But they also tested at a much higher limit than the machine could detect. And when the limit got lowered down to 70 parts per trillion in drinking water now, that will be revised upward. Somewhere between now 6 million or maybe 76 million people are drinking this, which is a much larger percentage of the country than anything else we've ever faced. The EPA official I spoke with said, you know, if you take PCBs, dioxins, and asbestos and roll it all into one, it's going to be nothing compared to this thing. This is way off scale in terms of pollutants. This is our last, we call it an emerging pollutant because we're only becoming aware of it. It's been there for decades, and it's going to get worse. My role in it is that I have a particle accelerator. I got to find something to do with it. It looks for a spectroscopic signature of fluorine. I can see fluorine, there's a popcorn bag in red and copier paper in black, and I can see a signature for fluorine in about 30 to 60 seconds. The typical test for this takes over 2 hours and costs about $400, $800, depending on who does it. I can do this for 25 bucks if I try. I charge the Navy 50. And we can get a fluorine signature. It doesn't tell you which chemical it is, it just tells us it's present, and most fluorine is not natural, so it's pretty easy to find. I find myself writing policy statements now as opposed to science papers, but I would do both. And I'm going to try and give you a glimmer of what you can do, because as Julie evidenced, you can do something with the community. And our community in this case is global, because this stuff is everywhere. So here's what we did. We published a paper because my students, playing with the accelerator, also were eating lunch, and they took the Jimmy John's wrapper and stuck it in the beam. Hey, it's fluorinated. And I said, how did that happen? And so we went and looked at 500 food wrappers from around the nation, and we got several volunteers in different states to send us food wrappers. You go to a $9 employee and ask for a food wrapper without any food. What do? How many would you like? And so we got unused wrappers from 500 different companies. We published an article saying about 30% of them are fluorinated, And this article went viral. We had 300 news stories. I got a reporter in France calling me up. We got an Onion satire of our paper saying, "I'll never eat a French fry wrapper again." And it's off scale. We've got, in 2 years, 20,000 downloads of this paper. And an amazing thing happened. 3 U.S. senators wrote a letter with some prompting from a nonprofit, I know, to all the companies, McDonald's, Starbucks, Panera. Everybody got this letter saying, "We understand from the Washington Post you use this chemical in your food wrapping. What's your company policy for removing it, and how soon will you do it? Please respond by April 19th. What do you do if you're the president of Starbucks? You get that letter. You call the vice president and say, "Make it go away." They don't want anything to do. They sell tacos, they sell pastries, they don't want any of this stuff. And to my knowledge, all 20 of those companies have in the last 2 years changed their wrappers, okay, or are in the process of doing so, or say they are. But what was remarkable about that is that I had no idea what I was doing at the time, but what's happened is that there are impacts that you can have that you have no idea what's going to happen. And what happened was, without a single lawsuit or without a single change in the law until 3 months ago, the state of Washington has now changed the law on this packaging, but until that point, we've made a company change through driving just consumer awareness of what was there. And I don't really care about it being on the fast food wrapper, because how often do you eat the wrapper? How often does it get in contact with the hamburger that you eat? Probably not often. But what happens to that wrapper after you've finished eating the hamburger? 100% of them go to the compost or the landfill, okay? Some people compost in landfill, some people just landfill, okay? 100% of that will get into your water in 60 days when it aerobically degrades. All paper degrades in about 30 to 60 days in a landfill. 100% of those chemicals will come off, and all of them will pass through the water that you or your children will drink. Okay, so this is a forever chemical. It's going to be there until we stop using it. And the answer is, what do we do in terms of stop using it? The firefighting foam is another big issue. These are the environmental working group's map of where there's a known site. The only reason every state isn't covered in blue and red is the fact we haven't looked. And Indiana's noticeably naked because we don't look for that sort of stuff. Michigan is ground central these days, and North Carolina just filed suit for $900 million against 3M. Minneapolis got $900 million. DuPont shelled out $671. These guys are losing billion-dollar suits left, right, and center, and they're still in business, okay? Because they're only just beginning to understand what the threat to this stuff is. Here's one that I'm working on now is the firefighters. They are not only exposed to AFFF, this firefighting foam, but they are also wearing protective clothing, personal protective equipment, that is laden to keep them dry. You don't want to go up a ladder with 60 pounds of gear and 60 pounds of water weight. So you have a surfactant, and what are we going to give them? The best surfactant known to man to keep them dry. Well, nobody told them that the PFAS that was in the firefighting foam are also present in the outdoor of their gear. And firefighters, you may not know, but since 1975, cancer is the leading cause of death. 75 and before, it was heart attack. Now they're dying of cancers at the rate of 3 out of 4 firefighters will die of cancer. Nationally, it's about 1 out of 3 of us. But firefighters are exposed. It's probably because they're breathing the smoke. And so they're all wearing self-contained breathing apparatus. They're all deconning after a fire event, things like that. However, they're also wearing a chemical that is known to cause cancer and other such things. And there's 3,900 or something of these chemicals out there. Only 6 or 8 are monitored for at all. And they're not widely done. So we're doing some testing for them. I'm speaking to the FDIC, the Firefighters Conference next week in Indianapolis, and we're going to tell them the bad news. So I'm going to end up pretty quickly, but I want to add one note of positives as to hold this thing. There's going to be a wonderful talk from Mark Edwards and others that have, and you can see what people of different groups are doing. You can do whatever it is you do professionally, but you can do it with an idea that you can change things. And I used to think I couldn't change a thing. I had students, and that was the best I could do. Now my students are empowered to go out and publish science and use that science to drive policy. And we have to. It's our burden to do that. Because we know something, we can measure something. I don't have enough money to measure it, but what I can do is I can measure it, and then we can then force people to change. And we don't regulate in this country. This is not going to be a country that we can regulate chemicals. I'm not talking about laws. We can regulate the laws. We should. but we don't regulate chemical. There's only 3 chemicals banned in this country, okay, and there's 86,000 out there. We will, you can make asbestos-laden underwear and sell it. I kid you not. You can make a company and sell asbestos-lined underwear tomorrow. Nothing legally will prevent you from doing that, even though asbestos is known to be bad. What prevents you from doing it? The liability of somebody would sue you if they got, you've seen the mesothelioma ads, right? Okay, somebody will sue you if you put something out there that does that, and the threat of suit is a very powerful tool, okay? However, we're not going to regulate it in advance. We're going to notice afterwards. All these chemicals that are in the TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act, are all self-reported to be healthy, okay, or no known, but 85% of them don't have any testing data at all, okay? And so human testing data is much lower than that. So we don't know how toxic it is, nobody's regulating that, and so we have to drive market forces. When you go to the mall, do you need to have the best waterproof jacket in the planet?